Alright, so now let's go inside in the same neighborhood where the phones don't have to be dial tone first, and so the panel switch that's also in this neighborhood can serve the coin phones. There are two office codes in this panel, TR2 and TR8. Tremont is both the name of a street and the name of a tandem in this building, actually two. So maybe TR is Tremont. Now this central office building, Grand Concourse, has a lot of power supply noise. And from the panel, we hear that same sound that we were hearing from the crossbar 1. But it's not quite so loud. It's actually kind of pleasant instead of screaming in your ear. So while we're dialing, you will hear that sound. And let's call East 150th Street ME5. ME probably stands for Melrose, which is both a street name and a neighborhood name in that area. This group of phone calls all follow the same pattern. We're calling from this panel office over a direct trunk to another panel office. If you want details on how this works, there are two sources you can go to. First, the Connections Museum has done a really great video showing exactly what happens in an intra-office panel call. I also did a program a few years back, Gedney 9 Program 3, that takes you through the sounds involved in an intra-office panel call and describes exactly what the sounds mean. These calls are different in that they are inter-office, and as such, they use an additional panel switch in the process. Now that's the selection through the first selector called the district. I'm pausing time because this is an inter-office call and there's a second selector. This did not happen on the call explained by Gedney 9 Program 3 and doesn't happen on the Connections Museum video either, but here it does. There. So now we've had 4 revertive pulse digits, the brush and group on the district selector, and then a brush and group on the office selector that the district led to. We are now on the incoming side of the panel we're calling, and everything from here on out is the same as in those two programs that explain it so well. So as Ben continues to dial, the sender is going to control the switches in the office we're calling. So here's the thousands. I can tell this is a wire trunk already because the volume level of the pulses that reflect back to us is lower. Had this been a carrier trunk, it would have been the same volume as our local pulses, but this is going down a wire trunk, and those cause the level of the pulses to be lower, as heard by the phone freak listening while dialing. When he dials the hundreds digit, you will hear 2 revertive digits. That's the group on the incoming selector and the brush on the final selector. That digit there is the incoming group, which is the slowest pulse rate of all the digits in the panel. I'm pausing time. It's actually followed immediately by the brush selection on the final switch. Now that's the 9900 group, which numerically is 434, which ends up being 545 because panel counts up from 0. He dialed a 9, and we got 10 pulses. No encoding required there, just adding 1 because we're counting up from 0. And the last digit, also a 9, will end up being 10 pulses in the pulse language. Anyway, that's how this next group of calls go through. They're all going over direct wire trunks to other panels, and of course they use 2 selectors in this originating office to get to the trunk. The next call is to LO7, the only panel in Upper Manhattan's Thayer Street building. Here, LO stands for Lorraine. The ones down at West 36th Street are Longacre. Oh, and while I'm thinking about it, 244 in West 36th Street was Chickering. In any event, the LO7 ring has a squeal in between rings that is very common on City Ring. The 3 central offices northmost in Manhattan, Convent Avenue, Thayer Street, and West 176th Street, are in the Tremont sector. They're in Message Unit Zone 3, and here you can see their panels, at least, go to Bronx intercept, not one of the Manhattan intercepts. Here's Wadsworth 3 in West 176th Street.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording.
One number you're calling.
923-3794.
923-3794. 923-3794. Try that number again.
By the 1970s, when you got a busy signal in panel, you usually would hear a ring first. That was not the original design, but after busy signals stopped flashing answer supervision, this is how it became. Here's one in MO9, which probably stands for Mott Haven, a neighborhood in the area, in the East 150th Street, South Bronx Central Office. On this particular call, there's a squeal that we hear right before our ring is going to trip. This is probably the sound of an unbalanced trunk on another phone call going into complete oscillation. We hear it because it's so loud it leaks through the ring supply. But the tone doesn't last long because the customer making the call hears it and hangs up. Here's another call to MO9. On this call, the Bronx intercept operator starts to answer the old way, which was, "I'm sorry your call did not go through. May I have the number you're dialing?"
sorry, what number are you calling, please?
669-5267.
5267? 669-5267. Please call the number again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, a call to Jerome 8, East 167th Street, Bronx, featuring some metallic noises audible through the sender. Now calling Jerome 8, we get machine intercept. The intercept arrangement in Jerome 8 puts on an audible ringtone before the recording gets around to the beginning. The audible ringtone used before the recording starts is different from the real ring. We actually heard the real ring before, and it sounds basically like this. But the ring they use for a sound effect waiting for the recording to get around is this. Which features a lot of this between rings. That's a combination of low tone and high tone, always a pleasant thing to hear in the old network. Anyway, at Jerome Avenue, there are two city ring supplies that sound fairly different one to another. One of them has the low tone and high tone, and the ringtone itself has a different EQ. The other one has no low tone and high tone and is kind of clear. And on this call, you hear both. And at first, I thought it was two separate city rig machines in the building. But the timing on intercept calls to Jerome 8 indicates that it's the same ringing machine, just two different phases.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected. The number you have reached is not in service at this time. This is a recording.
What is the number you dial, please?
538-4329.
538-4329. 538-4329 is temporarily disconnected. Temporarily turned off.
Thank you.
And there you have proof that New York Tel actually did send calls to customers who were cut off for non-payment to the recording rather than directly to the operator. That was to save operator time. This was a New York thing because none of the other bell companies had recordings that said, "is not in service or temporarily disconnected." To finish out the direct trunk calls we're making to other panels, here are some answered calls. Ben hangs up within the 2-second grace period to get his dime back. Here's one to Kingsbridge 8, followed by another to Kingsbridge 3, both in the Bronx Kingsbridge building. On that last call, the off-hook signal has a surprising lack of bass response. Yeah, what I'm used to hearing is more like this. I don't know why that is, but I actually went back and checked to make sure my hum reduction process, removing the meaningless electrical hum picked up by our pickup coil, didn't somehow take the bass out of it, and no, it really is that way. That actually makes me wonder if perhaps that was an unintended free call due to a bad trunk or a bad final switch. So those are all the calls going over direct trunks to panels in other buildings that I wanted to show you. And in fact, every building that this has direct trunks to panels in is represented here. There aren't that many. Why? Because we're calling from a panel and panel cannot alternate route. So if you're going to build a direct trunk group to another panel, there has to be enough traffic to justify making it a full group. It's got to be big enough to handle the rush hour traffic, no alternate route. So not surprisingly, the only panels represented as direct trunks from here are in the Bronx and that tip of Manhattan that is almost an honorary part of the Bronx. Another thing contributing to the relatively low number of panels we have direct trunks to is that each panel office code has to have a separate trunk group. So, for example, in West 176th Street, we have Wadsworth 3, Wadsworth 7, and Wadsworth 8. They can't share trunks. It's got to be a separate trunk group for each one. Number 1 crossbar, however, allows 2 codes to be handled over the same revertive pulse trunk group. And so from panels, you see a lot more direct trunks to crossbar 1s, due to the fact that most trunk groups can handle 2 office codes, and also there are just a lot more crossbar 1s in the city as of the 1970s. But in 1937, before crossbar 1 came onto the network, the New York City telephone system was mostly manual, with some dial offices, all of which employed the panel switching system. 1938 saw the introduction of the first number 1 crossbar offices. It was a significantly more advanced system than panel, and because it didn't have anything in it like panel selectors, there was actually no need for the number 1 crossbar to use revertive pulsing except to communicate to and from panel offices. So what did the number 1 crossbar system use? Mostly revertive pulsing. It was too early for MF, and the environment into which it was being installed was largely panel. And so, number 1 crossbar, even in communicating with itself, used revertive pulsing. Calling number 1 crossbar from this panel office, we can hear that revertive pulsing is being used, but it does sound different. Number 1 crossbar doesn't have panel switches, and so the pulses that we receive, that are audible fortunately, don't have that same rhythm, changing speed from digit to digit, that you hear on panel. Instead, the pulsing has a uniform pulse rate, but it follows the same numeric code with a minor exception I'll cover later. This first call to a number 1 crossbar is to FI8 in East 97th Street, Manhattan. When we dial the office code, that sounds the same as calling a panel in another building, the only difference being the specific numeric code that pinpoints the direct trunks to FI8 in East 97th Street. It's when we dial the last 4 digits that the pulsing sounds different. Here's the thousands. Now there you have a revertive pulse digit coming back toward us from the called office. And because I've been listening to these tapes for over 2 decades, I can already tell that we are not calling a panel office. That's because the pulse rate of that first digit that came back from the crossbar 1 is noticeably slower than what we would get from a panel. When we dial the hundreds digit, we'll hear 2 more digits being revertive pulsed back at us, and again, there, the exact same pulse rate. There would be much more variation if we were calling a panel. And now the last 2 digits, which again will see that same uniform pulse rate because all the pulses we're getting once we connected to FI8 are coming from a sender, not panel switches.
Hello?
LO2 is a crossbar 1 in the Bronx Kingsbridge office. Here's calling LO20000, a number which surprisingly appears to be assigned. Now, of course, revertive pulsing counts up from 0, so when your last 4 digits are 0000, that ends up converting to the pulses 11111. So after we dial each of the last 4 digits, you'll hear a 1 coming back from the crossbar 1, except the hundreds digit where you'll hear 2 of them. Here's the call. Here's a call to UN6, a crossbar 1 in the Manhattan West 108th Street Central Office. Here's a call to the DA8 crossbar 1 in the Hoe Avenue Bronx office. This goes to a telephone company supervision test line. TI2 is another crossbar 1 code in Hoe Avenue, Bronx. The Hoe Avenue, Bronx building is distinctive in that it has 9 office codes, all of which are crossbar 1. That's a record for New York City. No other building has 9 number 1 crossbar office codes in it. Not surprisingly, the office has at least 2 ringing machines. DA8 rings like this, but on the following call to TI2, you can hear a different ring, this, which has high tone in the background. Here's the call to TI2. I recall making a few trips to the Hunts Point neighborhood in the Bronx to record DA3, another Hoe Avenue Crossbar 1 code. DA3 rings the same as TI2, but differently from DA8. Here are 2 calls to intercept. The second one Ben hangs up on.
What number are you calling?
323-9962.
323-9962? 323-9962, I'm sorry, that number has been disconnected.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected.
The Trattman Avenue Bronx building has a really robust, high city ring that you can't ignore. Here's a call to TY2. On this call, while Ben is dialing, you can hear some crosstalk of a conversation. West 176th Street, in Manhattan's Washington Heights neighborhood, being in that upper tip of Manhattan, is in the Tremont sector,
21226.
along with the entire Bronx. But for intercept, it's a mixed bag. The panels have Bronx intercept,
I'm sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or temporarily disconnected.
but the crossbar ones have Manhattan intercept, namely the AIS at 5030 Broadway.
The number you have reached, 795-6585, has been changed. The new number is 638-4345. Please make a note of it. 795-6585 has been changed. The new number is 638-4345. If you need assistance, you may stay on the line, and an operator will answer.
Operator 5, how may I help you? Operator.
Had that 795 number been assigned prior to 1965 or so, the AIS would have said,
The number you have reached, SW56585, has been changed. The new number is...
The East 150th Street South Bronx office has a city ring machine that you always get when you call the panels Melrose 5 and Mott Haven 9. But when you call the crossbar 1s, WY3 and LU5, sometimes you get this.
Hello?
On that call, Ben dialed the whole number without pausing between digits, so you didn't hear the panel pulsing to set up the connection to the trunk, but you did hear the number being sent to the crossbar 1 all at once. By the way, that is the only ringing machine of that type, I call it pseudo-modern ring, in the entirety of New York City. There are no others. In Westchester County, there are several, including White Plains and Scarsdale, and there's a few others, I believe. Nassau County had one on its new directory assistance distributor that came in around 1975. Well, the next thing I need to do is explain how it is that when a panel calls number 1 crossbar or number 5 crossbar, there can be two office codes reached through the same revertive pulse trunk group. I don't like to do a lot of technical explaining toward the end of a program, so let's end this one here and pick up with that explanation, including a few more calls to number 1 crossbar, and then maybe some tandem calls. That's next.